I want to welcome everybody today to the 10th annual, what we call Breakfast at Lasker, where we have a group of students, postdocs, and so forth from various institutes questioning the winners, and this is the 70th anniversary of the Lasker Foundation.
So I'm a final year student, I'm full of self-doubt. So when did you realise that you'd made these groundbreaking, field-changing discoveries? What was that moment? How did you know that you were going to change the field? Or were you just worrying that you'd made a mistake in the lab?
I think both the scientific winners can address it. Jim, why don't you might want to talk about the checkpoint and
I was trained in biochemistry, but I became interested in the immune system just when T cells were discovered, and it was an argument I remember about whether they even really existed, and so almost any discovery you made about T cells, as long as it was correct, was new then. So we worked out the structure of the antigen receptor first, and they just continued studying it, but there were several times. So I guess the biggest one was with the story of CPLA4. It's very T cell regulation turns out it's very many layers and very complicated, but the first is antigen recognition, and then there's a co-stimulatory signal required. And then there's this other molecule that nobody knew what it did. And the ones that first people studied said it was a co-stimulatory molecule, and we decided it wasn't. It was an inhibitory molecule, and they thought it was a co-stimulatory because when you put in an antibody to it, it increased activity. But we said, no, it's not another positive, it's a negative, and you're blocking a negative. And so we were convinced, I was convinced we were right, and so we kept going with that for about 3 years. There was a lot of shouting at Gordon conferences, disagreements, but by then we had already had the idea of how to treat cancer by manipulating that pathway.
I had a question I think is particularly appropriate. I was hoping the recipients could comment on what they feel the roles of a mentor are in science and medicine.
But I think that mentors are essential because, in short, I believe that mentors are the one who believes in you when you don't believe in yourself. And that's the bottom line.
Jim.
I think you've got to be a friend and be challenging at the same time, and help teach rigor, but be supportive and keep somebody going. But I think one of the most important things, and you alluded to this, is teach people how to appreciate, well, two things. One is there are a lot of things you can do. You should do the important ones, do the things that really matter. The second one is you got to know when to quit. You got to know, have the wisdom. You're just beating your head. Either you're just wrong, or the technology is not going to allow you to get a good answer or something. So you just need to move on. But anyway, during the training process, that comes along, and being supportive and making sure people don't get discouraged. Because an experiment that teaches you something, even if it turns out wrong, is just as good as one that's right. But also later on, help with advice, career development, finding a job, and all that stuff. It's really a lifelong commitment.
I had a question, it's targeted, I guess, for everyone, but really around the ethics of the biggest ethical challenge that you faced in your career, and also especially for Dr. Liu, looking at the interface between clinical medicine and research, and how you kind of balance that, especially while you're in the field, in terms of the people asking for research demands and your clinical practice.
Joanne, do you want to start?
Yeah, there's many folds to your question, but to answer your question about ethics, I'm going to take a very, very vivid and recent experiences with Ebola. It's the fact that for us, it's been so difficult because what we realized is the fact that we didn't have ethical frameworks to do research, clinical trials during the peak of an epidemics. And then one of the things we've been confronted with for Ebola was the fact that people wanted to do randomized clinical trials to evaluate different treatment of vaccine. And one of the things that MSF stand for is the fact that we cannot use randomized clinical trials when you have a case fatality rate of 70%. This is not ethical. And so we were not able to resolve that. And then we lost key moments in the Ebola epidemics because of that. So it's the ethics of research is absolutely key, because it's not, and I'm an ER physician, And I always say, algorithm for ER is great because this is not when you have a blue patient, lying on your stretcher that you have to invent, how you're going to go about your patient. You just go through an algorithm to try to think for the next step, to deliver their thoughts. It's the same thing about the ethics. And so my plea today for the world is that we do agree on the ethical frameworks for research during epidemics, and that we don't have to lose those key moments and months to save lives.
Evelyn, like to weigh in on the question about ethics?
Well, I think one of the ethical questions that anyone faces in research is relations with your colleagues and with other people in the field. And I think it's very important to recognize priorities and to cite the work of others when it's appropriate, and not cut corners and try to make it look as if your own contribution is bigger. That was something I certainly stressed with my graduate students. And in general, I think the relations with your colleagues has an ethical edge in many ways. And for instance, one of the things that I tried to get my students to operate by was that if you just tell everybody what you're doing, you're protected against being scooped, rather than keeping things secret. And people know that this is yours. And I think that kind of generosity and cooperativeness is good for the field and good for the individual, and it isn't always practiced.
I'm curious if you have advice for how to stay creative and not just go along with the general thinking of the field. So for example, I was wondering if you suggest things like reading papers outside of your field, or changing institutions, or having collaborators from other institutions, or what has helped you guys along the way?
I don't think there's a real simple answer, but you don't want to be part of the herd. I've never wanted to be part of the herd, and you have to see what is important and what people are just following because everybody does this little tiny amount of stuff, and I prefer not to do that and really think of is this right or is there another way. I think it's very important to think hard about most anything, because one of the things about science, you can't ever really prove anything. All you can do is fail to disprove things, and I think it's not cluttering your mind with too much extra stuff. And if you're interested in something, really think about it and try to think, is there another answer to this?
I don't know. I think it's a matter of going a little beyond the boundaries of your own immediate interests. For instance, in looking at the table of contents of a journal, if something piques your interest that is not really immediately related to what you're doing, it's worth taking a look sometimes. I mean, if there's something that hits you that this might be something I want to read. And I did that a lot. I mean, and sometimes it was just interesting, and sometimes it sparked something. And I think it's important to follow closely your own area, but to take a look outside it is worthwhile. I think that's a good thing to cultivate.
I have a question for Dr. Allison that's sort of the flip side of that coin, which is sometimes you have to kind of stand up to the herd. I think with cancer immunotherapy there was a lot of naysaying along the way. So how do you hold on to your ideas when people are resisting them?
I think that you have to be certain you're right. The more you're clashing with the herd, the higher the bar is for you. And you have to be absolutely sure, but then you just have to stand up. I remember in 2004, I was invited to the Cold Spring Harbor cancer meeting, and to give one of the opening talks, and I looked at the program. I was the only immunologist on the program, and I looked at the attendance. I was the only person attending it that was an immunologist, and I thought sure they were going to kill me and eat me or something. And so I had to start off very apologetically saying, I know you guys all think, cancer immunology, snake oil, but please just listen to me for a minute. I'm going to talk to you about mechanisms and all this stuff. And so after a while, I just found, and I you know, some people came out, Jim Watson even came up to me and said, "You almost convinced me."
What was the tipping point in the Ebola epidemic, and what do you do differently in the next epidemic?
I think for us, it was really in the spring that when we found out that at one point, at the end of March, beginning of April, we saw that there were 4 locations of chain of transmission in geographically spread more than 250 kilometers. And all the past epidemics were always confined to one small villages somewhere in the middle of nowhere in Africa. So we knew it would be different. And we knew because of that having chain of transmission in 4 different locations could not be the same type of response that we used to do. And this is why we started to call very, very, very early on. And one of the things that we did is we just said that it's going to be different. We don't know what it does imply, but we knew that it will be different. And the reality is, what was a tipping point for the rest of the world, when the world listened and set up to us, is when cases started to be repatriated in the United States. And that's the sad, I would say, flip of that story, because I think that it was really, really clear that the affected countries could not respond on their own. And the only way that we could control the epidemics was if the rest of the world was responding with them.
In terms of the success, so what accounted for the decrease in the epidemic? It seemed like all I was seeing was hockey stick graphs, going up and up and up, and then suddenly something changed where, the epidemic seemed to be under control. Was it?
Well, Ebola is a very, very humbling virus, because the reality is, when you look at the epidemiology of it and the number of cases, what we realize is on week 34, this is when the number of cases, which actually happens to be in October of 2014, the number of cases dropped dramatically in Liberia. And actually, the drop of number of cases happened before the massive deployment from the West. And so, this is why we need you. You need to figure out more about Ebola and any new emerging threats. We do not understand Ebola today.
The biomedical field has seen many examples of crucial discoveries or breakthroughs that advanced the field significantly. What do you think the next most significant breakthrough will be in the field?
We're not telling.
Dr. Summer, why would you start?
No, I wouldn't even go there. There are so many areas. Every field has got an imminent breakthrough. And maybe one of you are going to be the ones who are, in fact, going to make that breakthrough. I mean, there's no reason why, as a doctoral student, you're not the one who comes up with the idea.
So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you.